We are just about ready to rock and roll. We're waiting for the stream to fire up on all cylinders, and it looks like we are there. Hello and welcome to another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here in Scottsdale, Arizona. My team and I, over the course of many, many years, we've helped thousands of good people facing criminal charges through the criminal justice system. And over the course of those years, over the course of all of that representation, what we have found is that unfortunately, there are a lot of problems in our justice system. There are a lot of things that we can do to improve it. And unfortunately, what we have right now are a lot of kind of really bad people running around the justice system. I'm talking about prosecutors, judges, politicians, really police officers. We're seeing this surrounding us throughout the country. There are a lot of problems. People are upset about it, as are we. This is something we've been doing for quite a while on this channel here, is to hold those people accountable. Law enforcement, police officers, judges, and politicians, the ones who have some skin in the game, the ones who are responsible for a lot of the conditions that we see, they need to be held accountable because, in our opinion, transparency is really the best disinfectant. By shining some sunlight on a lot of the problems, we're hopeful that you and the rest of the public will rise up and start to demand some accountability, demand some reform from the people who are in charge, because there are a lot of good people sitting in prison, sitting in jails, or facing difficulties in their lives just due to the fact that they've been kind of put through the ringer that we call our justice system. And so on today's show, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about some bad popo. We're going to talk about today's pretty much just a bunch of bad popo, bad police officers from around the country doing bad things and then making some moves so that they can sort of hide their culpability. And we don't want that to happen. So we're going to talk about the NBA. We've got a case from the NBA. It happened in 2019. We're going to run through and explain a little bit about some new developments there. We've got a group of troopers in Boston who are difficult. They are going through some difficulties with their compensation plans. And so I want to tell you a little bit about those. We've got a lieutenant named Mark J. Lombardi, who we're going to spend a little bit of time on and dissect what happened there. We've also got a story from the Boston Globe where apparently people are calling the Department of Child Services on other parents when their kids are not showing up to the Zoom meetings for their school, which of course is concerning. If you have the government coming in and telling you how to raise your children, I'm going to have some issues with that. And then we've got some updates on the George Floyd case. So it's been quite some time since we've had some substantial updates on that. These are not, I don't even know if I would put them in the substantial category, but there are some interesting things happening that we want to talk about. And so let's dive on in. By the way, if you're new to the channel, this is a show that we do every week. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. We want you to be here and get notified when we have new shows coming out. We're going to start doing more shows and producing more content. And also, if you like this stuff, share it with somebody else. The only way that this channel works, the only way that we can actually inspire some change is if you get involved and if you share the message with other people and they get involved. That way we have enough clout, enough oomph that we can actually demand some movement from our political people in office. All right, so let's dive into the news. So the first story that I want to go over today, this comes from the NBA. Now, this is a story that happened in 2019. There have been some developments that happened very recently, and more specifically, I'm talking about some video footage from an officer's body cam was released. But let's step back a little bit. So let's rewind the clock. Back in 2019, this involves the NBA, the Toronto Raptors won the NBA title. Now, I'm not a sports guy. I don't pay a lot of attention to it, but I know that's a big deal. I know enough about basketball and sports that I know winning a title is a big deal. It's a championship. It's the national game. You work all season to do this. It's a huge accomplishment. So it's a big deal. So this happens in 2019. I didn't see the game, but I didn't see this incident, but reading about it after the fact. And here's what we know. Once the crowd, the final, buzzer hits, the score is what it is, the Raptors win, what happens, right? The whole crowd rushes on to the court, and there's a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm about that. Everybody wants to be part of the celebration. Some people are allowed to be on there, some people are not allowed to be on there, but there is in most games, in most sporting games, most concert, most events, there is security to keep people who should not be on the court off the court. And so in this particular story, we have a gentleman who is an officer, and his name is Alan Strickland. And this is what he looks like right here. It's this guy right here. Alan Strickland is the white guy. The black guy, his name is Masai Ujiri. And it's important you know who these two people are, because we're going to go through. I'm going to tell you what happened. And so here's what happened. Once the buzzer goes off and everybody's rushing the court, Masai Ujiri, so the African-American fellow, he's running down to get on the court, to join the team. And what happens is Alan Strickland, the guy I just showed you, he is from the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. So he's an officer, and he's been assigned on this particular night to prevent people from coming on to the court. So Masai comes running down. He runs into Strickland, who is the officer, and there's an altercation that takes place. So these two sort of get into it. I'm going to play the video because I want you to see what actually took place in this entire altercation. But before we do that, let me give you just a few more details and then ask you some questions. So number one, Masai, right? He's a black man. As you can see, he's coming down onto the court. He looks very nice. He's in a suit and tie, and he's ready to join the team. When we watch this video, watch his body language. He's very excited to be there. Something profound had just happened to him, and he's coming down to join the court. Well, as he's doing that, Officer Strickland stops him, and so we're going to play the video right in a quick minute. But let me ask some of these questions. So once the altercation takes place and these two separate, so the officer goes his way, Masai goes his way, what happens? Well, the officer, for some weird reason, decides to sue Masai. And so, in other words, this guy right here, Strickland, the officer, is suing Masai. Why is that happening? Why is the cop suing the defendant? Why is that happening? It almost happens the other way almost every time you think about it. The cops will injure somebody. They'll want to sue the police department because they were injured or their property was broken or something was stolen out of their car when they were arrested. And it's typically the defendant is suing the cop. In this case, the cop is suing the defendant. Well, why is that? Well, here's what was said. So this article comes from, where does this come from? This comes from the Washington Post. Here's what the article says specifically. In a federal lawsuit, let me get to the quote so you can see this. In a federal lawsuit filed in February naming Ujiri, the NBA, and Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment as defendants, Strickland alleged Ujiri assaulted him and that he had suffered injury to his body, health, strength, activity, and person, causing him great mental, emotional, psychological, physical, and nervous pain and suffering. So when we watch this video, that's what I want to ask you. When this is happening, do you see that Strickland, who's the cop, who's going to be the guy wearing the body camera, do you think that he suffered injury to his body, to his health, to his strength, to his activity, to his person? Did this incident, ask yourself, did it cause him great mental, emotional, psychological, physical, nervous pain and suffering? The article goes on. It says, he also filed a workers' compensation claim against Ujiri because he circumvented the security checkpoint and then tried to storm the court and hit him in the face and chest with both fists. So that's a direct quote from the article and from the complaint. The cop sued Masai and then said all those things. Pain, injury, mental harm, everything's a mess. The guy's a disaster, right? According to his claim in the courts. Well, what actually happened? Let's take a look at this. Let's do a little bit of a play-by-play. If we're talking about the NBA, let's break this down and let's see what actually happened. So I have the video. Ask yourself those questions as we go through it. All right, so now we have a wide angle view. You can see they just circled the cop where he was standing. He's kind of blocking the way there. We see Ujiri walking down. And then you're going to see a little bit more. You're going to see Ujiri push him back, actually. So watch this. One push. Another push from the cop. There it is. And then Ujiri pushes him back. All right, now everybody's jumping in to sort of assess. So let's do this one more time and kind of break it down play by play. So they just won. Golden State Warriors are upset. Here comes Ujiri. Now, if you look at that, when I pause the video, you can see that it's kind of grayed out there. But you can see as he's walking through this, he is actually pulling out his badge. So he should have an all-access pass that he's going to be pulling out and showing the cop. He's sort of fumbling for it right now. So he's pulling it out. This is going to happen very quickly, but you'll see that he actually holds it in his hand. There it is. See the lapel, the lanyard, and he's already thrown. So as he's walking up to the cop, he's already thrown back. So the cop just instantly grabs him and just chucks him back in that other direction. Now, at this point in time, if you look, the badge is out. The badge is in his hand. So he is, now, there it is. You can see it in his right hand. It's kind of flailing around. He didn't drop it. I thought he dropped it at first, but he didn't. And it's in his hand. Cop. Now, if you notice that also, another thing, the cop, watch how the cop runs up to him. Okay, so when we back that up, the cop goes his direction. So ask yourself, who is the initial aggressor here? So Ujiri is walking down. He's got authority to be there. He should be on the court with the rest of his team. He's the president. Did I forget to mention that? He's the president of the Toronto Raptors. That's who this guy is. He's supposed to be on the court. He's coming down to join the team. He has every authority to be there. And so he's trying to identify himself and say, hey, I should be here. Let me in. And he's pulling it out. The cop had already thrown him back. Now, when he's back, when he's far away, watch the cop basically bull rush him, run right up to him so he gets back in his face. So let's take it again. Came up to him, pushes him again, and then it's going to cut. So you can see here, he pushes 2 pushes from the cop, and when he's coming back, Ujiri pushes him back for the 3rd time. So you'll see. There it is. He's walking right up to him. 1 push. Watch the officer run up to him. Push him again. Everybody's grabbing the cop. Hey, we know this guy. Then Ujiri pushes him back. So you watch that, and you have to ask yourself, let's go back to the complaint. Let's go back to the lawsuit. In what you just saw, did Ujiri and the NBA cause injury to his body, to this officer's body, his health, his strength, his activity, his person? Did they cause him great mental, emotional, psychological, physical, nervous pain and suffering? Did he get hit in the face and the chest with both fists? Did you see that at the beginning? You saw it on the 3rd, right? You saw it at the end, and you can make the argument that maybe Ujiri shouldn't have pushed him on that 3rd one. But guys, really? If a cop is basically assaulting you and you have every right to be on that court and you decide to push back, what was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to just sit there and accept this abuse from that cop? I mean, just kind of roll over and just take it and take it and take it? Well, no, of course not, right? A cop who is violating your rights and violating your civil liberties, you don't have to just sit there and take it. So you would think, right, that this whole thing happened. Why did Officer Strickland want to sue him? Well, probably because he learned later that he's the president of the Torontos. He probably has a boatload of money, and he wants a little bit, a little piece of that. And so is that it? Is this where this whole thing stops? It's just a civil lawsuit? In other words, Strickland just filed this claim in federal district court just to get some money and we're going to forget about it? The answer is no. So this actually even gets worse. When we go back to the article, you'll see here that in addition to suing this president, so Ujiri, the NBA president, in addition to suing him, this cop and the sheriff from Alameda County, Greg Ahern, they wanted him to be charged with a crime. Specifically, they wanted to charge him with battery of a peace officer. The Alameda County Sheriff Greg Ahern initially requested Ujiri be charged with battery of a peace officer. The Alameda County District Attorney's Office declined to press the charges after an investigation ended with a meeting among the office, Ujiri and his lawyers in October. So they were going to even charge him with a crime for this whole thing. They want to sue him and get money out of him personally, but they wanted to lock him up. It started with that. Officer Strickland said, this guy assaulted me. You saw with your own eyes what really happened there. A guy with lawful authority to be on the court who was pulling out his identification, got thrown by an officer who bull rushed him, threw him again, and then an altercation took place. That officer instigated and caused this entire ordeal to happen. He could have just put his hands up and said, hey, where are you going? Hey, this is closed. Can I see some identification? Which would have been a reasonable way to approach the situation, but that cop didn't. The cop, call him racist, call him whatever you want. The guy's an asshole as far as I can tell. A guy is coming right up to him. He throws him and then bull rushes him right in his face to get up in his face and tell him, I'm in charge here, and pushes him again as he's holding his badge that says I'm entitled to be on the court right there. Other people around the area are pulling back on that officer and saying, hey, we know this guy. He's got authority to be there. What are you doing, in other words? And they wanted to charge him with a crime for that. So a cop initiates, instigates, causes the altercation to take place. And when you respond, then they want to charge you with the crime. We see this all over the place, right? We saw this in Breonna Taylor's case. Remember that situation? We're not going to talk about it today on the show because there's not much to talk about. Nothing's happened. Nobody's been arrested in that case as far as I know thus far. But the point is those cops, they went to Breonna Taylor's house. They started firing into her room. They killed her. They thought that they had the right house and the right residence. They were doing a no-knock raid on that place. And the guy that they were after was already in custody somewhere else. They ended up shooting the Breonna Taylor's boyfriend, who was in the room with him, fired back at the cops. So the cops start this situation. And because he fired back in self-defense, he didn't know who they were or what was going on. They charged him with the crime. So they caused the situation, then they charge you with the crime for your response. It's exactly what happened in Masai's case. Now, fortunately for him, this guy is the president of an NBA team. So he's got the money. He's got the resources to go and defend against this case. He probably had very good lawyers who are probably very expensive. When a situation like this happens, that officer goes back, files a report. So if you read the rest of the article, it was a good article, it was on Washington Post. Masai ends up, everybody breaks up those two. They say he's got authority to be there. So he actually does make it down to the court, and he has conversations and does interviews while he's down there on the floor. But then this officer goes back, he's going to write a report, probably a bunch of nonsense in that report, and he's going to submit that to his sheriff, and they're going to submit it over to the prosecutor's office and say, look, we think that you got to charge this guy. They didn't. They sat down because Masai and his attorneys, in all likelihood, went and had what's called a pre-charging conversation. So they met with that prosecutor's office, the pre-charging bureau, had a conversation with them, and then determined this case isn't going to go anywhere. These guys have high-powered lawyers. Maybe they reviewed the body camera footage. Who knows what happened? But all said and done, they decided, this is not a winnable case. And they decided that they were going to not press charges. So his attorneys moved very quickly. They probably got the body cameras quickly, got the discovery, the police reports, and all that stuff quickly. And if you notice, when we watched that entire situation that took place on the court, everybody was on his side. So Masai, he had everybody, people were pulling that cop's shoulders back like, dude, what are you doing? We all know who this person is. He has the right to be here. So he's got a number of witnesses. He's got many, many people who are going to help him out. And the article goes on to say that he actually does. He's got 3 witnesses who are going to vouch for him and say that he was not the initial aggressor. But this still happened. What if this were you? What if this happened on the side of the road, or on the street outside of a bar, behind an alley somewhere, or something where there really are no witnesses, where you don't have access to an attorney, where there's not cameras recording from every which angle, you don't have people who are on the ground with you saying, no, he didn't do anything, or you don't even have the resources to go and get the body cameras or get the discovery or have a pre-charging meeting with the prosecutor's office, because you don't have the resources to do it. You don't know you should do it. You're just somebody who's in a lower to middle class sort of economic category, and you don't have the resources to go hire attorneys. These cops do this all the time. This guy just had the audacity to do it in front of an entire stadium filled with people. and he happened to catch the wrong guy who was the president. But what if this were somebody else? What if this were just another fan who was in sort of one of those lower socioeconomic statuses who didn't have the resources? What would have happened? He may very well have been charged with a crime. The prosecutors may not have looked at it. They say, we trust our police. We just, we read the reports. We don't review the body cameras. We don't have time to review it. Our officer is pretty trustworthy. And so they're just going to charge that person with the crime, and they're going to have to deal with the consequences. Even if the case is dismissed at a later date, that person may have come out of pocket tens of thousands of dollars to hire an attorney. I'm sure that Masai's bill is going to be very expensive. Now, he's filing a counterclaim, which is how this video came out. So the officer was suing him. He's filing a counterclaim against that officer. I think this officer's case is in big trouble. I don't think there's any likelihood that he wins, especially based on what we just saw here. Sounds like a big baby to me, saying he got hit in the face, hit in the chest with both fists, caused him great mental, emotional, psychological, physical, nervous pain and suffering. This was a pretty standard altercation that cop started, and his name is Strickland. His name is, we found the picture of him. Let's put that up one more time, just so we don't forget who it is. We've got Alan Strickland right here. This guy is a bad police officer. He's a bad popo, and hopefully they do something about that. I hope that he loses his suit. Hats off to Masai for what he has. He's sort of being very aggressive and proactive and fighting back against this thing, which is the right move. And hopefully law enforcement does something about this guy, or does something about Alameda County. I mean, the sheriff had this guy's back. Greg Ahern was gonna charge him with these crimes. There's no crimes that were committed there. But when you insult another officer, they all circle their wagons and they get your back. That's just how it works. So remember that when you see these types of situations happen, if you were in those shoes, the situation may go very differently for you. So Alan Strickland is a bad popo. All right, the next story that we have, let's move on. We've got this one. This story also comes from the Boston Globe. I've mentioned them a few times today. The Boston Globe says that let me back up a little bit. So let me explain something that I learned when I was growing up. Okay. When you want to, let's say that you're growing up and you've got some brothers. I had two younger brothers when I was growing up. Or you're growing up and you spend some time at the friend's house, or you've got some, a bunch of siblings or a big group of friends, you're in grade school, whatever it is. The teacher, your parents, your mom, somebody, they say, I'm going to give you a bag of candy, but I need you to share this with your brothers, share this with your siblings, share this with your friends. They give you a big bag of candy and they said, hey, mom says, you better split that up evenly. Separate that candy out, spread it around to everybody who's in your friends, and make sure that it's done equally. My mom did this for sure. So I would take that candy or take the bag of cookies or whatever it was, and I would spread those around to my brothers. And I would say, here's one for you, and here's one for you. And because I'm a part of this group, I'm going to take one out of the community pot, and I'm going to hold on to that one. And then we're just going to keep going around until all the cookies or all the candy's gone, right? One for you, one for you, one for me, one for you, one for you, one for me. You remember doing this, right? This happens all the time. Well, what would happen if I didn't pass those pieces of candy out, or I didn't pass those cookies out? What if I said, look, I'm in charge of passing these things out for sure. I do a good job of this. So brothers, I'm going to give you everything, in equal portions. When I get the candy, I'm going to do that. I make that commitment to you. So you don't even have to worry about going to mom and getting the candy. I'm going to handle it for you. Cool, Rob. You're a great guy. You've never done us wrong. You're in charge. Great. So the next time that my mom gives me a bag of cookies or a bag of candy, I say to myself, those people over there, they don't really deserve these cookies. They don't really need them. Maybe they're a little out of shape. They had plenty of cookies yesterday. I'm just going to go ahead and presume that they don't want them. And I'm just going to keep those cookies for myself, and I'm just going to hang on to them, and I'm going to take them back to my house, and I'm going to deposit them in my pantry, and those are going to be my cookies forever. What would that mean? What would that be? That would be essentially theft, right? There's a lot of things to call it. You can call it embezzlement. You can call it fraudulent schemes. You can call it misappropriation, conversion, tortious interference. The cookies from my mom were never intended for me. A portion of them were, but the others were intended for the other people in that group. So by me accepting them and then holding on to them, essentially that's theft. I'm taking property that was not mine, that was entrusted to me to pass on to somebody else, but I violated that trust. I was holding on to those cookies with no intention of giving them out or even having a conversation about it, and I misappropriated them. I took those and they are now mine, right? This is very similar to other things, right? What if you take your electrical cord and you plug it into your neighbor's home? You're taking their property, right? That is misappropriation of something. Well, that is essentially what happened in this story. So we can see here from the Boston Globe that a state police lieutenant, a top earner, retires amid internal probe into paid detail violation. And he makes a big admission here. Did I shortcut the process? I did, but there was nothing unethical intended. So here's what I want to discuss. So in Boston, here's what would happen. Every week, Mark Lombardi would get notification that he got a new bag of cookies that he needed to divvy out. These were called special details or detail assignments that were overtime assignments. And the reason why other officers wanted this is because they get paid very well for these types of cases. If you get on special detail or on special assignment, they pay you $50 an hour. Now, normally, which is good money for this type of work, $50 an hour. Now, normally these paid detail shifts, they go to the first trooper who in the past basically 5 weeks who didn't get a shift. One of the past troopers, if you didn't work a lot of hours, you were up in the queue. You got the next detailed assignment and you could go work and you could get that additional overtime, get that money, get that detail money. And sounds like a pretty fair deal. The guy who works the least gets the first crack at it. The guy who works the least the next time gets the next crack at it. And so you just kind of have this round robin where you're passing out the cookies in a fair manner. Sounds pretty fair. So in this situation, what happened was Mark got the details. Mark Lombardi, who is a 27-year veteran of the Boston Troopers Association, Troopers Police Department. And he got the details and he didn't pass them out. So he got the cookies, but he didn't share the love with his other friends. He only kept them to himself. And that's what I was explaining where he said, did I shortcut the process? He said, yes, I did, but there was nothing unethical intended. His justification for it is that these other officers, they wouldn't have wanted the assignments anyways. Most of these assignments were for early in the morning. They were things that he wasn't too he knew them. He knew they wouldn't want to do it. It's too early. It's 5 a.m. They're still asleep. They don't want this assignment. So guess what? I'll just take it. And he goes through and he short circuits the whole process. So he gets that overtime. He gets that money. Now, is this a big deal? I mean, it sounds like it's just a little overtime. How much money could that really be? I mean, how much are we talking about? Are we talking about like 10 hours every week? Are we talking about, $10,000 on a year? Let's say he's getting $100,000 in salary and he's making $110 because he took some extra shifts. Is that what we're talking about? It's a little bit more substantial than that. Let's take a look at the numbers from the article. Last year, Lombardi made $297 and $252. So over $250,000. He was the fourth highest paid total in the department, including $38,000 in overtime and $112,000 in detail and other pay. So that guy is making close to, what is that, $150,000. About half of his income is from these different assignments, from overtime and from other detail. Basically, he's doubling his salary. If his underlying salary is about $150 and he's tacking on another $150 on top of it in sort of taking these opportunities from his fellow troopers, he's going to basically double his income. We're talking about $300,000. All those times you hear those stories about these cops, about how unpaid they are, underpaid and overworked and how stressed out they are. This guy's making $300,000 a year. I know doctors and lawyers and many professionals with many years of education who don't make that kind of money. This guy's been on the force for 27 years. Presumably he's getting his pay bump every year, and I don't fault that. People who are worth that are worth that. But when somebody comes through and they actually start shortcutting the process, so that their other people don't get it, and then they rack up, they double their salary. The question then becomes, is this officer really worth $300,000 a year? I don't know. Maybe he is. I really don't know. That's up for the department to talk about, and that's for his fellow troopers to talk about. What about the people who would have loved those opportunities at 5 a.m, but they didn't get them because this officer was dishonest and he took those opportunities away from them? He says, did I shortcut the process? I did, but nothing unethical was intended. Those are his words. Well, for the last 27 years, did this guy arrest somebody who didn't intend to commit a crime, who didn't intend to do something, did not intend to get into an argument with their spouse? But they did. Things got loud. Their neighbors called the police. Cops show up. Somebody gets arrested for that. Did they intend to get arrested? Of course not. Did they intend to speed when you pulled them over and gave them a speeding ticket? Probably not. Most people are not intentionally speeding around just trying to get in trouble with law enforcement. So this cop is going through and he's saying, well, yeah, I mean, look, I did do that, but I didn't intend to be unethical. So, of course, what are they going to do about this? Are they going to let him get off the hook because he had good intentions? Probably. Did he let people get off the hook when he stopped them and they also had good intentions? I'm going to guess probably not. The article goes on. So what did the agency do when they learned about this? I'm guessing somebody else told on him. One of those other fellow officers said, we're not getting any of these special detail assignments. What the hell's going on here? They didn't get it. And somebody complained against him. And so what does the police department do? They say, well, upon learning of the alleged violation involving an administrative matter, immediately began an internal investigation into Lieutenant Lombardi. The statement said that investigation is ongoing. And so this is the other part of these internal investigations. They investigate themselves for their own administrative problems, and they just let these investigations go on and on and on. And I don't know what's so complicated about it. This guy admitted that he was doing something that was unethical. He didn't intend for it to be unethical, but it was. He made basically double his agreed upon salary taking these assignments. So he was supposed to be making about 150 grand. He made about 300 grand, just under that, because of these overtime assignments and these special detail assignments. And he's not really in any trouble at all because he's already retired. Oh no. So you're telling me that he starts getting under investigation, and he just goes ahead and he just retires. Yeah, look, I've been doing it for 27 years. Maybe I should retire. Now, of course, he says that it has nothing to do with his investigation. No. No, it really has to do with the constant pain, the constant mobility issues from car crashes. And really, it was from an increasingly negative view of police officers. It's the physical pain, and it's also the way I feel we're being treated by the public and the politicians and the higher-ups on our own job, Lombardi said. Now everybody hates us. Oh no, everybody hates us. He says, listen, I understand the narrative of the day is every cop is stealing money and every cop is bad, he added. I understand the narrative of the day is every cop is stealing money and every cop is bad. You are helping craft that narrative. Do you understand that? You were stealing money from your fellow troopers. You were taking assignments that were not yours. You didn't take the cookie jar and handle it appropriately. You took all of the cookies and you ate them. And then when you got caught and you got in trouble, you just retired. And then you didn't even own it. You said, I didn't intend to do anything unethical, but you did. And now the narrative, you're right, it's going in that direction because we on this show and many others like us are calling these situations out. Historically, these cops would have just been able to slide under the radar. But now with the increased pressure, there's some accountability. This guy, it retired for some stupid reason. His department is taking, forever to investigate. The investigation is ongoing. Either he did it or he didn't do it. Just come out with a statement. But they're not going to have to come to a conclusion because he is already retired. He's already said, okay, I'm done. I'm bouncing out of this department. He's a very bad popo on that. We got to tell him. Mark Lombardi Bad popo. You have to be ethical. You have to be ethical. I don't know what your intentions have to do with it. You and your people, you and the police departments, you and prosecutors very, 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 very infrequently will dismiss a case or give our clients any break because of their good intentions. Almost never. Basically never. So the fact that you want to skate away because of good intentions doesn't do it for me. There's more to this story, though. This is actually a huge problem out of Massachusetts, and this has been going on for a long time. So the state's largest law enforcement agency has seen its reputation battered by a series of scandals in recent years, including a widespread scheme in which dozens of other Boston troopers or Massachusetts troopers were collecting overtime pay for shifts as well. They never even worked. They took overtime pay, so they were signing up for those details, but they didn't go in and do the job. They even wrote phony traffic citations to cover their tracks. That's from this article. Lombardi's not the first trooper to be accused of pay-related misconduct. Some troopers are now in federal prison over it. Earlier this year, a state inspector general's report said that the payroll violations and lax oversight have been common across the agency for years, including the troopers regularly broke the rules relating to paid detail shifts. Oh boy, the report criticized the department for using roughly 24 troopers, nearly all earning six-figure salaries to handle clerical duties of processing paid details, work that could have been done by lower paid civilians. So they were working, they were claiming they were working when they weren't working. They were writing fake traffic tickets in order to cover their tracks. And then they were using actual troopers to do clerical work that should have been kind of handled by some other people, and then claiming that that's part of their duties or that they're entitled to additional work for completing those tasks. So these guys who are supposed to be, the moral authority, the people out there enforcing justice, the people who just care about you, they just want to help. They're out there to do good. They don't care about money. They're making the ultimate sacrifice. Here they are essentially embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars by doing fake policing. And what is going to happen about it? We don't know. We are going to see, and we'll see what Massachusetts does with it. But that's it for that story. Mark Lombardi's a bad popo. There's a lot of bad popo out of Massachusetts, and so we would tell you to continue to hold them accountable, and we'll follow up on the story if it needs following up. The next story I want to cover is also from the Boston Globe. So we've got just a lot of sort of insanity going on in Massachusetts. This story is talking about the Zoom police. The Zoom police. So the crux of this is, well, we all know, right? We've all been under quarantine orders for the last many, many, many months, depending on where you're living. That is now trickling down into the educational systems. So our schools are really not happening. Many schools have tried to make adjustments. They're doing these Zoom classes and they're trying to figure it out. But what happens if your students don't figure it out? What happens if your kids don't get on their Zoom class? They're 6 years old. They don't want to sit in a computer for 4 hours a day. They can't do that. That's insanity, right? So they don't show up to class. What happens if you're a single mom? I was raised by a single mom. She had 3 boys, worked full time. Would she be able to sort of corral us to sit us in front of a Zoom meeting? No way. I couldn't do 4 hours on a Zoom meeting right now. I'd go crazy. So what happens if your kids don't show up? Well, it's not good. The government gets involved, you see. Massachusetts school officials have reported dozens of families to state social workers for possible neglect charges because of issues related to their children's participation in remote learning classes during the pandemic shutdown in the spring, according to interviews. So what's happening is these parents, they're doing other things, and the kids can't get on the Zoom call. So other people, the teachers and other people in the know, are reporting them. Massachusetts school officials have reported, the school officials themselves are reporting these people to the DCF, which is basically the Child Services Department out of Massachusetts. So they've reported dozens of families to state social workers for possible neglect charges because of issues relating to the performance of participation in remote learning. In most cases, the referrals were made solely because students failed to log into classes repeatedly. Most of the parents were mothers, and several did not have any previous involvement with social services. So this is one of those situations you're just, what? So the government is now stepping in and saying, because your kid's not logging onto Zoom, that is something that basically justifies them taking your kid away. Did you understand how serious that charge is? Child neglect means you're an unfit parent. If you're an unfit parent, they take your kid away from you. They just take them because you're neglecting them. Right? Most of the time, these situations are if a parent is a severe addict and the kid is living in squalor or something like that. This is not because a kid didn't go to school. If you remember, there's a lot of issues about this surrounding Kamala Harris, who also was prosecuting people for truancy. And the reason why this is so troubling is because essentially there is a huge portion of the world in the population. And I grew up in a family like this with a single mom with 3 boys with very limited resources, extremely poor, and any sort of involvement from the government would have been catastrophic. My mom did an excellent job, did the best she can, but we went to, we didn't have it very easy. And so if one of the teachers would have called her and said, hey, your kid didn't show up for this or show up for that, by the way, we're going to send Department of Child Protective Services over to your residence, and we're going to investigate everything, and we're potentially going to take your kid away if we find that you're being neglectful. That's insane to me. I mean, I don't think that that's justified at all. What happens if a parent just says, I've got alternative arrangements. I'm going to have my child be educated by my mother-in-law or my mother or my brother or my family, or we're going to do a community education system or whatever that looks like. But instead, the government shows up and they're starting to charge people with neglect for kids not showing up to school. So the woman that this happened to, Keelace, said that she told staff at Hurd Street Discovery Academy that her work schedule made it tough to assist in virtual schooling. She struggled to navigate the school's online platforms, and they didn't offer any help. Then in June, she received a call from the State Department, and they said that she was being accused of neglect because her 7-year-old missed class and homework assignments. She said she couldn't believe it. She said it was one of the worst nightmares for a parent. A neglect charge, if substantiated, can lead to removing a child from their home. It came during a period of unprecedented educational disruption in which parents, students, and schools all struggle with ad hoc routines and challenged even the most engaged, but would result in some being singled out for how their child responded. School staff are required to notify. The staff has to notify when they have reasonable cause to believe that a child has been abused or neglected. Is not showing up to school abuse or neglect? You can be the judge of that. As I said, most of these neglect cases, kids are malnourished, kids are in drug-addicted homes. They're in a situation that is unhealthy for them. They experience domestic violence or something worse than that. But it's not somebody doesn't go to school. That's a whole different category. Now, you may want to think that, because of your living situation, that amounts to neglect. I certainly don't think so. There are many ways to educate a child. There are many different resources. Now, I will tell you this. I don't have any kids, and I don't have yet, and I don't have anybody in school. I'm not super invested in the educational issue, but I do think that when we start seeing government encroaching on stuff that should be reserved to be dealt with in the family, that is a big problem. The idea that the government is going to come in and basically take somebody's kid away because they're not showing up to Zoom meetings. The article goes on a little bit. Apparently the schools were helping them get laptops and get logged on to things. But, many homes don't even have the internet. I've had people who watch the show call the office and say, hey, I go over to my friend's house and I watch the show at my friend's house because I don't have the internet at my place. Keep it up. In other words, that's my point. It's, we live in 2020. We all think we have the basic necessities. We all think that we have iPhones and iPads and laptops and internet everywhere we go and Wi-Fi and 5G, but there are many people in this country that just don't. And they are going to be the ones that are hit hardest by these stupid policies trying to have the government educate your kids, having the government tell you how to run your household. Maybe the mom doesn't want her kid logging onto Zoom at 8 a.m. maybe that's just not what they want because she's working and the kid's doing something else and school's going to happen at 5 p.m. Whatever it is, the fact that they're being threatened to have their kids taken away is insanity to me, and I hope to not see any more of this. But this did come out of the Boston Globe. There are a lot of people who are kind of up in arms about this thing, as they should be. In Lynn, for example, 2 parents were reported to DCF for their child's absence from online learning. They did not receive information about getting laptops. They did not have internet access because they do not use Facebook and email. So they just even simply couldn't communicate with the schools. There's just no conversations happening. There's a back and forth going on. The school superintendent is saying, oh no, her story's totally inaccurate. We didn't file anything. We only do that in rare situations. But Keeley says, no, it didn't take long. The state social worker during the initial call said that the complaint had no merit, but she still had to deal with it. So fortunately, she's not going to lose her kids. But at some point, maybe somebody will, because some bureaucrat in some department of child whatever got a report that you're not a good parent. Scary as hell to me. I mean, if I'm in that position and I do have kids, that is going to be a difficult situation to deal with. Now, as I said, I don't have kids, but I was thinking about this education problem and this education situation. And so I want to propose an idea, just something that a friend and I were talking about yesterday. Actually, another attorney here at our firm, we're talking about this. And I was just, I had not seen anything like this elsewhere, but I wanted to just throw this idea out there. I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator. I'm not in any of this stuff, but I am somebody who likes to think simply, and I'm not sure what is so complicated about this education problem. So I'm going to throw it out there. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who say that wouldn't work for this reason or that reason or whatever reason, but I'm just going to throw it out there. So here's what my sort of proposal was. The big problems with our education right now, a couple things. Number one is the congregation of too many people in one places. If you've got 20-something students and one teacher, we're all paranoid and petrified about coronavirus. If you congregate that many people in one location, that's gonna cause problems. The teachers are now out there throwing body bags around. The teachers' unions are all up in arms. Same as the police unions. It's a lot of problems with these unions who think that basically they've got all this bargaining power and they're going to go in and set the rules. So that's issue number one, right? They don't want to go back. They don't want to teach the kids because they're afraid for their health, which is justifiable. And they're concerned that, it's going to be like a little petri dish of students spreading the coronavirus. While the kids may not get sick, the teachers will get sick, and they're going to be the ones who, are going to suffer the consequences of that. So certainly we want to minimize that. We want to mitigate that as much as possible. So what if we address both things? What if we were able to have smaller teaching facilities, smaller classes, smaller organizations, and we were able to provide compensation in a way that worked for all of those teachers in smaller, safer environments that are sort of little individual, I'm calling them nodes. So this is my idea for education nodes. Why don't we do this? In our different neighborhoods, why don't teachers or families even set up education nodes? And here's what we can do. We can follow the CDC guidelines, so we can gather, 10 students in a room, put the teacher up front, far away from the rest of them. They have a place to go. They have a place to congregate. We limit the group size. We temperature check everybody on the way in and on the way out. 10 students per one teacher. The students, their parents pay the teacher $500 a month. Say whatever that is. Let's say it's $500 a month. Okay. So at those numbers, that teacher is making $5,000 a month, which is $60,000 a year, which you may say, wow, there's a lot of problems with that. Number one, where do the parents get that money? Where are they going to get that $500 a month? There are a lot of poor families. They're the ones who don't have any, they don't have anything to support their funds for education. Well, a couple things. Number one, you take it, you that amount of money, whatever it is, $500, $700, $1,000 a month, whatever it is, you take that out of their property taxes. So they don't have to pay property taxes on that. They don't have to pay state income on that. Income taxes, they basically get a deduction for that. Same with the federal income tax. So they don't pay any federal income tax. They don't pay any property taxes. They don't pay any state local income tax. So that's easily equivalent to $500 a month for somebody who's working, right? The people who don't, the funds that we're already giving to the other schools that are supporting those, that are basically already going into those from other people's property taxes, you apply for a stipend, whatever, you get a certain grant as long as that's being used to those other, to go directly to those teachers. All right. So now a teacher's getting $500 a student, 10 students. They're in smaller confined little classrooms, smaller modules, and the students are temperature checked. They're not congregating with as big of a group. It's more isolated. We sort of know where everybody is, where they're coming from, where they're going, what families they're connected with, and all of that stuff. The teacher can stay farther apart if they're concerned about that, or if it's a younger teacher, somebody who is not so concerned about catching the coronavirus or dying from it or getting severely ill, they can kind of get back to normal. So we have these little education nodes. It's basically paid for by deferring tax money. The parents don't have to come out of pocket for it. They just don't have to get that taken out of their paycheck anymore. As long as it's going to their student, as long as, we're going to support them, we're going to help fund that by letting them keep more of their own money. So they enter into this agreement where they're paying $500 a month to the teacher. Teacher's making $60,000 a year. That teacher doesn't get any income tax. So the teacher doesn't have to pay any income tax. So that is entirely exempt from the income tax code. So in other words, if you were familiar with the news, Joe Rogan was moving from California over to Austin. Why? If you listen to his show and listen to his numbers, and I believe it, he says 53% of his income, every dollar he makes, 53 cents on that dollar is going to the government in some capacity, whether it's state tax, property tax, gas tax, sales tax, federal income tax, all of that. 53% of his money is going away. Now, he's obviously in that very high income tax bracket, so it's going to be a big number. But let's just say, okay, so let's say 30% of your income or 40% of your income is going to the government or to the taxes. And so that teacher making $60,000 a year, if it's not taxed, it's really kind of the equivalent of making $80,000 or $90,000. Or if you're in California and you want to use Joe Rogan's number, that's basically like $120,000 out there. Because if you're making $120,000 and $60,000 of that is going to the federal government, about half, and you're keeping $60,000, you basically have the same money. So we're just not going to give that, we're not going to tax, we're going to stop taxing everybody, and we're going to tell people to engage in their own educational nodes. And the teachers, this is not a full-time deal for them. They can do a few hours in the morning, some really intense learning, say from like 7 to 12. The kids can break for lunch. They need 5 hours of learning, or 8 to 12, 4 hours of learning, where they can get some really good education. And then in the afternoons, that's when they go get their social skills. They go out and they go to a camp. They go to, they play dodgeball. They play sports. They do scavenger hunts. They do bigger group activities with a younger, it's like PE. It's like physical therapy or physical education, where they go and they play sports and they learn how to do things, more activity. So in the morning, they get their education. At night, they get their physical activity. And all of this stuff is just organized by individual households. There are plenty of available spaces for all of this stuff to take place. Everybody's working from home. There are tons and tons of empty commercial buildings, empty offices that are just sitting open, and nobody's using them. So these little nodes between private people can solve the educational problem. Now, what, my friend Taylor, who I was talking to yesterday, said, well, something like that wouldn't work in a state called Oregon, because they have rules. If you have 10 kids or you have 10 things, that is now against the law. The law says you can't do that. Well, why is that? Who knows? Probably because the teachers' unions didn't want the homeschooling to take place, didn't want people to engage in these private transactions. But if I know that I have a person in my neighborhood who's a former school teacher or a current school teacher, and we say, look, you don't need to go in there. You don't need to go deal with all that bureaucracy. You have total control of your curriculum. We trust you. We know you're going to educate our child appropriately. Is this feasible? Is 10 students too many? Is 10 students maybe not enough? Maybe we could get up to 10 or 12 or 15 students, and the teacher could make that higher level of income. There are so many ways that we can solve this. I really don't understand what is so complicated about it. other than we're not talking about addressing the issue. We're not talking about educating kids. That's a pretty simple thing. We're talking about a lot of politics. We're talking about a lot of money, about big school districts and things being passed around. It reminds me very seriously of everything that we're talking about with the police unions. A lot of power, a lot of sort of skirting any personal liability and just kind of passing the buck around to other people. There's no accountability. When nobody's responsible for anything, they all can kind of do a mediocre job, and the kids are not getting educated right now. So that's just my proposal. Don't know if it's a great idea or a dumb idea, but it was something I was thinking about, and I'd love to hear from you. I'm sure there's going to be many of you tell me how dumb that is and why that would never work. But that's what I'm throwing out there for you there. So thanks for indulging me on that. All right, the final story that I want to talk on today is we want an update on George Floyd's case. So George Floyd's case, there's some activity going on, and I want to just kind of run you through what that looks like. So there were some headlines today that there is a motion to dismiss that was filed by Thao, who was one of the officers who was involved in actually on the scene when George Floyd passed away, or was murdered essentially. So here's what's going on with this case. Now, when you're charged with a crime, when you're charged with a felony, one of the things that the government has to do is they have to prove what's called probable cause. In other words, there needs to be enough evidence there to say that we even can bring the charges. So it's not that you're guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You hear that standard all the time in the movies. That's what a trial's for. That's when you get a jury, because the government has to gather the evidence, and they have to say there's enough evidence here to prove that you actually committed that very specific crime on this very specific day, under these very specific conditions, with these very specific facts. If the government can prove that, and they can prove that beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning if there's any doubt that's based in reason, then that person is not guilty. They got to that's their job. It's a tall task. It's a very difficult burden for them to overcome. Not really. They say that it is, but not really. Most people, most jurors, most judges, most prosecutors all presume our clients were guilty. This really high standard is kind of a bunch of nonsense. As soon as a jury walks in, they basically go, "Oh, that guy's guilty." They do that very frequently. It's very unfortunate, but that's part of sort of how our culture has been basically brainwashed to think that if you're sitting in the defense chair, you're automatically guilty. Cops are always right. Bad guys are always bad. It's very difficult to get people to actually listen to some evidence or think logically. But that's a topic for a separate day. But when we're talking about probable cause hearings, it's a much lower standard. So beyond a reasonable doubt, very, very high, very high burden for the government to hit. It's a much lower standard for probable cause. So in order for the government to just even start the criminal case against you, they have to show that it's kind of more likely than not, or there's enough evidence to say, we suspect that this other stuff happened. And so what Thao's attorney is doing is saying there is no probable cause. There's no basis for this charge even to begin with, and therefore we're asking that it gets dismissed. Now the motion you can see here is somewhat long. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the entirety of it, but we can see here that, well, give me 1 second. Let me get this screen going. All right, so if we hop over here, you can see here that this was the motion. It was filed in the state of Minnesota, the county of Hennepin, in the 4th Judicial District, and it's going to the judge. They're saying right now they're asking for an order dismissing the charges that are filed against him because there's no probable cause. They said they're required to set forth certain facts, but they're asking that they both get dismissed because they're saying that Mr. Thao did not have the required mental state, meaning he was not of the right mindset. He was not intending to aid and abet Derek Chauvin, who's the other officer who put his knee on George Floyd's neck and actually killed him. There's no evidence that he was intending to aid and abet that. There is no probable cause as to what specific acts of Thao's furthered the commission of the underlying crime. So what did he do specifically that led to the death of George Floyd? And then they're asking for an order that says that all of this fails to establish the probable cause. And so, that's something that I think is going to be litigated. They're going to, so this motion was not filed in Derek Chauvin's case. It was filed in Tad Thau's case, which is another interesting thing. So now it seems like these two parties are sort of pointing their fingers at one another. So Tad Thau is saying, I didn't do it. I was there, but I didn't do it. There's no probable cause. Everything that I did was legitimate. If we go through the actual, so what we saw was sort of a notice that a motion took place, but then we actually have the motion. We have the memorandum and the, wait, no, that's not it. That's not it. Okay, so basically the rest of the motion is just saying that they don't think that he did it. There's no justification for charging Tad Thau with any crimes. He was there. He used a lawful chokehold according to the police department manual, and he never woke up that day intending to go kill anybody. He also didn't know that the other people were intending to kill George Floyd. So what he's doing is he's drawing a pretty hard line in the sand and saying, I didn't do that stuff. Those guys did it. And this is an interesting thing that happens when you have co-defendants. So George Floyd, there were 4 officers. They were all at one point sort of leaning on him. We saw that imagery from the back side of the van when they were all on top of him. Tad, what's this guy's name? Thau says that he had nothing to do with the actual death, and he's got this big long memorandum that is explaining essentially what his position is. So they're going to have to litigate this. The prosecutors is going to file a response basically opposing the motion to dismiss and saying, here's our basis for probable cause. In my opinion, they're going to find probable cause on this issue. This case will move forward. These charges are not going to get dismissed. A lot of this stuff is open to interpretation, so it's going to go forward, and there's going to be plea negotiations and stuff that take place further down the road. This is a pretty standard type of motion. When you're this early in a criminal case, you will see that people are filing these motions just almost as a matter of necessity. It's just kind of part of the template. If in certain situations you always want to challenge probable cause, because if you can win a case at this stage, everything gets thrown out afterwards. So this is kind of a standard operating procedure here. There are some people on Twitter and on the news sites saying, oh my gosh, they're asking to dismiss the charges. What does this mean? I don't think it's that big of a deal, quite frankly. I think the government is going to respond. They're going to lay out why the probable cause exists. I think they're going to be correct that the probable cause does exist, that he at least contributed. He did aid. He did sort of abet these other officers in their conduct, which resulted in the death of George Floyd. And so I don't think that anything's going to happen on that basis, but we will see. Now, the other interesting thing that we learned is that the government is actually trying to join these cases together. So you can see here, which is actually, this is something that I was not aware of, but all of the documents are now on the Minnesota government's court website. So you can see here, this is all of them. This is for Derek Chauvin. So you can just go right there. This is all public record. You can go to Minnesota Judicial Branch, and there's a link to high profile cases. You can sign up and receive the notes. But you can see here, Tad Thau filed his, and a similar motion is not here for Derek Chauvin. But what we do have is a notice of motion and a motion for joinder. And what does that mean? Well, if you look here, you're going to see that all of these different cases, these are all different cases, right? We've Derek Chauvin, we've got Alexander Kung, we've got Thomas Lane, we've got Thau. All separate cases, all separate case numbers. They've been charged differently. There are different people. And what this motion is doing is it's saying, what we saw previously was Thau was saying, basically, I'm not a part of this. I have nothing to do with this. It's those 3 other guys. They're the ones who did it. Derek did it, and the other 2 who were involved, they did it. I had nothing to do with it. Judge me on my own activity. Judge me on what I did on my own. Which there's a lot of value in that, right? Because if you can start separating yourself out from that, whatever happens to those other guys, good luck to them. They're on their own. But me as a defendant, I want my day in court. I don't want to be connected to those other guys, especially on this case. This is a disaster of public relations for these guys. You get a jury. These guys all might go to prison forever. As I think I think Derek Chauvin is in the worst situation, but I don't think that's happening for these other guys. So Tad Thao is saying, nope, we're going to blame the other people. Had nothing to do with us. Go get them. The government is coming back and saying, no. We're going to join these cases. We want to move all of these things together because it's surrounding the same incident. They were all involved in the same death. The allegations all stem from the same murder of one individual, George Floyd. They all relate directly to him. So why do we need to have 4 different trials? Why do we need to separate these things and present all of the evidence to one jury for Derek, present all of the evidence for another one against Tao, another one against the other 2 officers? Why do we need to do that? Why don't we just consolidate them? And then that way, what they're going to try to do is connect the dots. They're then going to say, okay, so Officer 1 showed up and did this. Officer 2 showed up and did this. Officer 3, Derek, sat down, put his neck on a knee on George's neck. George died. Officer 4, Tad Thao, did this, all these things. Tie them all together so that you can kind of judge the case as a totality. They all were involved in this thing. Neither one of them, and none of them, can really extricate themselves from liability, from culpability, because they were all involved in it. They all did, they were all parts of what resulted in his death. Maybe if it was just one officer there and the other 3 weren't keeping the crowd back or ignoring their pleas. If you remember the video, it's a brutal video to watch, but there are bystanders who were saying, he's dying, man. What are you doing? Like he's dying. He can't breathe. He's telling you, he's literally, you're killing him. Hello. And those other officers were pushing those people back and just ignoring them. So maybe they contributed to his actual death. Maybe if it was just one officer, the public would have said, bro, and pushed him off and maybe picked him up and done something to save his life. But they didn't. They were there. So they contributed to it. It's just like if you are robbing a bank, you and your 3 friends are robbing a bank. They go in and rob the bank. You sit in the car and you're going to drive them. You're the getaway driver. Well, they robbed the bank. You didn't rob the bank, but you're still culpable for that thing. You're still a bank robber just because you were there and you didn't pull the gun out and point it at the clerk and fill the bag full of cash. That doesn't mean that you didn't do anything wrong. You were still there. You were part of this scheme. You were part of the entire operation. So in the totality of circumstances, the government wants to keep these things together and not let the defendants point their fingers at each other. They're saying, no. It's all 4 of you. You're all responsible for this thing. And they're going to move forward accordingly. So it's going to be interesting to continue to watch. The next scheduling order says that we've got new updates are due by September 8th. So the defendants shall file their responsive memoranda and their supporting materials. So the government said, we want to join these cases together. The court is saying, all right, defense, what do you guys have to say about that? And the defense, all 4 of them are going to have to respond and say, make their own arguments for that. So we're going to see what those look like. Are they really pointing their fingers at each other? Why are they going to not want these cases to be joined? We'll find that out shortly. The motions and the memoranda are due by September 8th. And then the hearing the briefing will be discussed at the September 11th hearing. So that's just under a month away. We're going to see that. And this comes from Judge Peter K. Hill from the state of Minnesota. And so that's all that we have for today, my friends. Let's hop on over to the chat, see if we have any comments, any questions before we sign off on the day. I will tell you this, a couple show notes. We are hopefully going to have a new studio next week. It may not be done by next week, but we're gonna fix some of the lighting. We're gonna fix some of what you see here because it's looking a little dark. I'm not real happy with it, but we're going to make some adjustments. All right, so let's go and look at some of the comments. So we've got Gordon G, who says, I hear you, Rob, but your suggestion is still playing into all the COVID hype and fear. Basically, the kids are safe, and if there's an elderly teacher who is at risk, let that teacher work remotely. Yeah, so I totally understand that perspective, but I think the issue is that kids don't learn well in front of a Zoom screen. Actually, one of our somebody on our team here has 2 children. They're young, like 6 and 8 or 8 and 10, something in that range. And she's pulling her hair out getting these kids to sit in front of a screen. I would too. I mean, I'm not that type of person. I need to move. I need activity. I need creative time. Sitting in front of a screen would be brutal. Even now, 4 hours on a Zoom call. Oh, Good Lord. Okay, Lataurus Wing says, it is unfair that Gavin Newsom kept his wineries open and he enjoyed million from the stimulus, but he forced employee businesses to be closed because they are not essential. Dems still going to tax you. Yeah, I have a huge problem with all these close downs. They've closed down a lot of stuff here in Arizona. The gyms specifically are still closed, and a lot of other things are open. For some reason, our Governor Ducey, has a bone to pick with the gyms, and he's been going back and forth with one of our local gyms here called Mountainside Fitness. They're going at each other's throats, but they're still closed, and I'm wondering why that is. We know from a lot of the numbers that obesity and people who are in poor health, they die at a much higher rate. I don't think that number is even up for debate anymore. So we want people to be more healthy. We want people to lose weight, to go to gyms, to get exercise, to get fit, and that's just not happening. So the schools are another big a big one that is causing ripple effects throughout the entire country. There are going to be long-lasting ripple effects. I'm seeing more and more stories about suicides are up, alcoholism is up, drug addiction is up, domestic violence is up. We're getting more domestic violence calls now than other types of calls, relative to one another than we have ever before. Domestic violence calls are way up because people are sitting at home and they're boiling and they're fuming and they're not getting exercise and they're not having their stress relieved and they're not, their kids are surrounding them. So the bill is going to come due for all of this stuff. The people who at the beginning of this were saying, we got to shut everything down, lock everybody down, close everything, nobody can do anything. There will be some major consequences from this. And I have not shared it on this show, but my family has been seriously hit hard by COVID, but I am still of the mindset that we have to get back to work. Because the repercussions from this thing are going to be so catastrophic. We're going to get over the viral crisis, but we are going to be emerging into the middle of a mental health crisis, the likes of which we've never even seen before. So the bill will be coming due, and we're just going to try to weather the storm the best we can. Invictus Media says, great channel, respect from Texas. Thanks, brother. Thanks for being here. We've got some other comments. It is unfair. I saw that comment. Dems use thug to attack people with stand-down cops in San Jose. Dems try voter fraud. Broward with mail-in ballots, concealed delays. Dems done this tactic back in Washington State already. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting election. We haven't even started diving into any of that stuff yet, but we're going to. We are definitely going to. Maybe we'll start next week. So if you are not already a subscriber, hit the subscribe button. If you're watching this segment or you're rewatching this live show, please subscribe and do me a favor. Share it. Just share it to somebody. Say, hey, this channel's, they're new, they're growing, and they're talking about a lot of very important stuff, important things. Just have them hit the subscribe button. Come check us out. Share the channel. Post it on Reddit. Post it on Quora. Post it wherever you post things. We'd really appreciate that. It helps us grow. It helps keep the momentum going, and we love that. As another aside, shameless plug, shameless self-promotion. If you have not already gotten a copy of my book, it's called Beginning to Winning: How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System, written by yours truly. There I am. We cover a lot of good stuff. We cover a lot of about 9 main parts of a criminal case, 3 most important characteristics you must use to build your offense, 10 examples of mitigation, and so on and so on and so forth. So if you know anybody who's been charged with a crime, if they're unfortunately going through the criminal justice system, this book can help them out. If they're going through that in Arizona, of course, my office can help with that. That's what we do. We've got 6 lawyers here. We are great at representing people in criminal cases because we do more than just represent them in the criminal courts. We want to make sure that their lives are back on track and that they're good. They're feeling optimistic. We can help kind of seal this chapter, put it behind them, and give them some tools and some energy and some motivation to move forward and sort of use this as an experience to elevate things even further. So we'll be back here next week, same time at 4 p.m. And there's probably going to be some more live shows coming down the pike. So be prepared for that as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Robert Gruler. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful evening.